Yes, we've got one brave soul.
Can you give an example of a permanent space?
That's a very good question. I think more permanent spaces are like social institutions. For example, we can talk about the Methodist Church. That's my denomination, so I can criticize my own church. The Methodist Church, as an institution, has boundaries that are permanent. Historically, they value these. They have a value system and a way of running things. Every several years, we have a meeting, we get together to discuss policies, etc. It's a general conference. Another name for that is complete chaos. Because there are 1,000 delegates representing millions of Methodists from all around the world trying to decide policies for the next 4 years. So every 4 years, we have the same fight, fighting about how to structure the church, fighting if we should include gay and lesbian people or not, and fighting about whether global churches are treated equally. It's the same arguments again and again. And we have a voting process. The committee meets, the policy is discussed, it's proposed, and then there's a decision. If you have 50% plus one vote, you win. That's a permanent space. That is a fixed way of doing things. Very fixed. All of the different interest groups are invested in that system. That is a fixed system. It's not a temporary space. We were just talking about how to change that. We're having a general conference instead of maybe having rows of chairs, maybe having small groups. Sitting people at round tables rather than in pews, for example. Like you're sitting at the dinner table. Did it work? There's no overnight change that's going to happen. But at the last general conference, it was really fascinating. The committee restructured the church. They didn't come up with a policy that they could all agree on, but they tried to come up with one that they could. And finally, it barely passed, the one that they did come up with that was proposed. But when it came down to it, it was against the constitutional principles, so it was rejected. So there was business that couldn't be finished. We were trying to change things, but we all had to leave. So does that mean that we failed or that we succeeded? What does that mean? But it's a permanent process. We have a fixed Congress and we come together and we have a process for this. We have a 50-50 vote. We can have a discussion. What's the process? Do we change the way that we make a decision? What are we doing in churches? We use Robert's Rules of Orders. It's very important to run our meetings. That's a permanent space. It could maybe become temporary, but I'm not sure. I guess we'll see what happens 4 years from now. But a social institution really represents a fixed way, a fixed pattern. It's not necessarily a negative thing. That's a permanent space, though. Sometimes people feel very intertwined with those things. But it can be an illusion. That's one thing that I've learned from Buddhism over the years, is that everything is an illusion. Everything is temporary when it comes down to it. Even if there's a permanent institution, it's still temporary, really. So when I think of something as permanent, it doesn't always mean that it's functioning in a permanent place. I think I would suggest temporary is more healthy than permanent. Temporary allows us to manage diversity in a more healthy way, rather than trying to set up a permanent structure and then follow it indefinitely. Temporary spaces allow for comfort and allow people to be comfortable with who they are. Any other comments or questions or ideas?
Hi. So I was wondering about the continuity issue. So if you have temporary spaces, lots of people talk about liminal space and interstitial space and the magic and promise that these create. And I agree with you. And I really appreciate you being here and all the wonderful things you shared with us, Kirk. Thank you. So if we want to have the magic of those liminal or interstitial or temporary spaces, how do we do that but still have a kind of continuity in the social justice work we want to do, since they're temporary?
Going back to that word kinship. Kinship can be permanent. Well, maybe not permanent, but it can have continuity. Kinship provides a relationship like a family. And a family is whatever you define it as, but it's really a partnership, a relationship that continues. And kinship can be passed on through the generations as well. And the next generation will most likely accept that because there is that established kinship. There might be changes, but relationships can change over time. But they still have that connection as kin. So that touch of nature that was described in this quote is really kinship. And without that, the magic goes away. It closes at 2 o'clock and the lights come on, the bar closes, everybody goes home, everybody's hungover the next day. That's not magical anymore. But that place is still there. What you experienced is still there. And how that affects your identity and your understanding of yourself is still there. You might decide to volunteer. Maybe you're an evangelical Christian and you want to do service work for homeless people. Maybe you're a very strong Muslim and you end up volunteering with that evangelical Christian. And after a while, over that service work, you bond, you have discussions, and you realize that you're not so different after all. When that opportunity, that volunteer opportunity is gone, they go home. Maybe they never speak to each other again. Maybe they never meet another evangelical Christian ever again. But they had that moment, and they understand what it means to be Christian or to be Muslim because they came together in that moment. Not necessarily the idea, but the person. The kinship continues. Anyone else? I'm having fun. I don't know about you.
I'm actually quite loud, so I don't need a microphone. So I don't want to be that person, but I just want to find some common ground.
Go for it. Be that person.
Are you familiar with the term serial collectivity?
Yes.
Okay, so when you talk about kinship and these temporary spaces, obviously I can't help but think about serial collectivity. And the idea that people actually come together through collaboration, but because of some kind of relational object or idea or thing, right? And I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to that, and feel free to reject that, because I understand I'm asking you to speak to my interest, and that's kind of unfair, but I see serial collectivity in this, but I'm wondering, do these temporary spaces allow for serial collectivity easily, or serial collectivity create temporary spaces? Like, what's that relationship?
That's a very interesting question. You got me thinking about that now. I'm cooking up some ideas. The idea behind that is that people get together at different times for different purposes. Before this lecture, we were over there eating dinner in the other room. And the idea came up of having a coalition, meaning that the community, different communities, the concept of coalition is different from a concept of a community. So serial collectivity points to having a coalition for a common goal and then dissolution when that goal is satisfied or realized. That can be a temporary space. If serial collectivity is more of an organic relationship, then that means you share a natural interest. You're different than me, but we both like to watch basketball. That's organic. You don't have a common goal that you're trying to satisfy. You just want to watch basketball together. Or maybe the Super Bowl. You know, maybe people get together to watch the Super Bowl every year. And are they watching the game or are they eating food? You know, are they there for the football game or are they there to enjoy each other's company? They come together for a goal to watch the game, but they have a relationship goal too. So there are various levels involved with that. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg scenario with temporary spaces. Serial collectivity develops from having a goal or having a coalition. It's not to develop a community. It may happen on the way. You know, that a temporary space might result from that, but they have a reason for coming together. That is more of a kinship. It might already be a temporary space. It might have been a temporary space before that because they already created a reason to come together. Like the football party. Everyone gets together and it's not a real reason why they're coming together. It's just a nice, easy excuse to have a party. I mean, people go to football parties for the Super Bowl. Most don't watch the game. Most of them don't even like football. It's an excuse to have a party, really. Why not? That's a temporary space. And that's related to serial collectivity. So I'm not sure if it can be divided by having a leader or not, but having a coalition is different from having a community. The community has opportunities for temporary space. A coalition can lead to a temporary space, but it's not automatic. Does that answer your question? Get you thinking? Does it help?
Yeah. I guess a clarifying question I would ask would be, so I see the benefits politically of serial collectivity. I feel like in my own queer life, I understand the benefits of kinship or community. But what are the political benefits of kinship or community?
There are lots of political benefits with serial collectivity because the goal is to have a goal, to achieve something, and then disband when that's realized. But the goal of a community is to socialize, to get together, to do things. And I just lost my train of thought. I had a really great comment and I lost it. Just one second.
Happens all the time.
Like the HUC and the NGTF, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. One's a single issue group that just supports gay and lesbian rights. HRC. That's all. That's their whole agenda. They have very clear policies and very clear goals. And that's a coalition agreement to work together to a common goal. When that goal is satisfied, or if they fail, that group will dissolve. The NGLTF, they want to approach many different issues. Social and economic justice. Their business becomes each other's business too. They're interested in equality issues, and they have many issues in common. They're looking more towards a permanent kinship. The result may be more of a community or maybe not, depending on how they go forward. But you see this popping up in church movements too. The Methodist Church group is reconciling the ministries network and including LGBT people. That's one goal. There's another group called the Inclusive Church, Church Within a Church movement, saying we don't need to ask permission from the church to run the church as we need to. It means that they can be inclusive, not marginalizing people, and they're fighting for that amongst all their various issues. There might be the same people involved in both groups, but their goals are, whether it's a single issue or many convoluted, numerous issues within the church. One just wants to change the church's inclusive policy, and the other one is, the one that wants to change the church's policy has a definite outcome. It's a dream, of course, but they want the Methodist Church to become inclusive. And they won't need to be together anymore when that happens. And the other group is more interested with the relationships amongst one another within the church. There is more of a political benefit with the first one. Both have political benefits, but the second one is more of a healthy approach to a holistic person. As a
So Black gay Methodists have come up to me and they are concerned about this reconciling ministry. They're concerned that perhaps this ministry is not looking at all their different identities as a Black gay Methodist. Whereas the other group, Church Within a Group, is looking at everything, is looking at gender inequality, racial inequality, social inequality, and looking at all those issues. The first group, the reconciling group, is a single issue piece. There's now a new group called the Black Ministry Church for Renewal, and they're a group of Black Methodist churches, and so people who are Black and gay and Methodist don't know which group they should be supporting, because different groups are fighting for one different part of their identity. Whereas the Church Within a Church group is looking at the whole identity, the whole portfolio of who they are as a Black, gay Methodist. So they are working towards a common goal. And that group, the Church Within a Church, does not have a clear ending, whereas the other two I've mentioned, they have a clear endpoint. And it's nice, it might be successful, and it would make change, and that it would make needed change, but the Church Within a Church is offering more. It's transcending that. It's offering something beyond just a one-issue resolution, because it's looking at the whole identity portfolio, and it's looking at the person's whole life. I see Tiffany making notes at the back of the room here. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, can you build a kinship community based upon virtues, values, and commitments as opposed to, or in solidarity with, the portfolio of identity?
That's a very important question. I'm working with two philosophers and actually looking at teaching ethics right now. So where virtue is defined and how it's defined, where it comes from, and a lot of ideas about virtue and the origin of it. And that is shaped by community's experience and generational experience. Virtues might be from a temporary place or an identity. A virtue can also be something that's performed by being good. You know, being good is a virtue. Being a good person, and then you perform goodness, and then you become a good person. So that can be an identifier as well. Trust is a virtue. If you trust someone, that's a virtue. But I don't know in this audience who I can trust, except for a couple people that I know. I believe I can trust them. But they have performed that they are trustworthy, and so they are a trustworthy person. Virtue comes from how you perform something. So that has a parallel to how we talk about identity, this identity portfolio. How you perform your identities and how you show who you are. And virtue and identities do have a connection. That connection can be broken by a vice, for example. Perhaps someone performs falsely who they are. That's a vice. Or maybe they present one way, but they act in a different way. So they are two-faced, as it were. And that can be a vice as well. So thinking about virtues, they can build community and they can build commonality. And those the virtues in the community are coming from the same place. So virtues and identity are not that separate. I think in some ways we should flip the whole conversation about identity and talk about virtues. What virtues and values do we hold in common? And what of my virtues and values are different than yours? And can we create temporary spaces where our virtues and values can combine? And where we can have a dialogue with each other? So it's the same process that we've been speaking about with temporary spaces and with identity. I'm going to go back to the SU slide and have that just up here as I like the picture there. It's a really nice picture. Any more? Yeah.
You were talking about the transition between identity when you were saying perhaps an undergraduate has an identity then, and then when they're going to become a graduate student, then they have a different identity. For myself, I'm hard of hearing, and throughout undergraduate school, I just struggled as a hearing person because I don't really do sign language. I kind of read lips, I prefer to read, but I didn't go to a school where that was really understood. So my identity became one of, I guess, sort of struggle and trying to adapt to the environment and sort of fool people into thinking that I could hear much better or that I was a hearing person. And that also, I don't go to school here, I work, I have a job. And that's another space in which I sort of have to adapt to everyone else. But now I have the opportunity where I have been accepted to graduate school, and I might be able to transition into an environment where I will be able to perhaps have a different identity, which is more truthful to myself as a hard of hearing person, where I will have the assistive technology available. So what would you say to somebody that is making the transition from one identity to another, when for so long it's just been that identity of not a really true deaf person, but then trying to become that because it just feels more comfortable, and then sort of having to be an academic in that way also?
I can speak. It speaks. I grew up hard of hearing. I did not use sign language. both my father was hard of hearing, he doesn't sign. He's also in denial, but yeah, he uses hearing aids, but this and that. If you ask my mom, they dated all the way through high school and then they got married, you know, traditional story. If you ask my mom, he was losing his hearing in high school. If you ask my dad, it was after high school. I tend to believe mom on that. So yeah, I grew up with that. I did not know sign language until I really came into my undergraduate years, and I began that transition. The first thing I have to say, you can do it. The second thing I have to say is it won't be easy. So let me transition back for a second.
I can sign. I work at Gallaudet University, and I sign with everyone on campus. I leave my hearing aids at home because I can. I have, deaf people around me. I have interpreters around me. I perform in my identity as a deaf person. But I can also perform as a hearing person or as a hard of hearing person, and all of those identities are in my portfolio. And I developed the skill to be able to do that. I developed the relationships to be able to encourage those identities. So at home, I speak with my parents, and I become a hearing person. When I come back to work after break, I'm a deaf person again. It's very odd. And then my housemates are all hearing, so I speak with them. I go to work, and I use my sign language. So somewhere on the train from my house to campus in Washington, D.C., somewhere in that train, magically, I become a deaf person or back to a hearing person on the way home. I don't know how that happens, but in my commute, that's how it happens, and I transition between the two. So I can see two visions here, the deaf world and the hearing world becoming a bridge. These are different images that have been used, that the deaf world and the hearing world, and there being a bridge between there. I don't really like that idea about walking on a bridge between one and the other. But I also see myself as a frog. I grew up in the water. I was a tadpole in the water with my little tadpole tail, and then I grew my little legs, and then I hopped up onto land, and then I could breathe, but I still could get into the water again if I'd like to. I can sit on a log or on a lily pad, with the water up to my eyes if I want, or up to my mouth. And when I close my eyes like now, I have two different eyelids, and when I close one set of eyelids, I can look underwater, and then the other one is still clear, and I can see up to the sky. So I'm a frog. Frogs are not always pretty. Most people look at frogs and think, ugh. They don't think, oh my gosh, look at that adorable little frog. Like a puppy dog or a kitty cat. I mean, most people anyway. There are some frog people out there. But most people, they don't say, oh, look at the cute, cute frog. Well, maybe you could find someone like that. But I'm a frog. Also, the frog population in the world is decreasing. Scientifically, scientists are very concerned about the number of frogs in the world. Globally, with all of the climate changes, how the earth is starting to raise its temperature, etc., there's less and less water, and many species of frogs are disappearing, and they are becoming endangered. So that's a biodiversity issue, because the world is dying, and the world needs frogs. Both the green hoppy frogs, but also people like me and like you, who are frogs who can transition, sit on the lily pad of the world and be able to look down into the water, but also look up into the land. But how to make that transition is something that you have to develop for yourself. And for me, it was the transition from undergrad to grad school. That's when I started working with interpreters full time. I started developing my sign language skills in my undergrad years, and thought that as soon as I got to grad school, I had enough of the fluency to be able to work with interpreters. And I didn't understand everything at first, but I was able to pick things up as I went along. And what I did was I looked for the deaf community. Wherever I could find deaf people, I just jumped right in. And it was very awkward, yes, I will admit that, because people were signing very quickly, and I wasn't able to understand everything they were saying. I didn't know if they were talking to me or someone behind me. But anyway, I was able to pick up the facility, the language. And I realized that growing up, all my life, I had been angry, and I didn't know it. I grew up angry and I didn't know why. And something was missing and I just couldn't name it. I didn't know what it was. And then when I found the deaf world, when I transitioned, that's when I realized I found this kinship. I found this missing piece. That's what had been missing all along. When the audiologist told me when I was 5, kind of patted me on the head and said, "Kirk, there's something wrong with you. You need hearing aids." I will never remember that. That is burned on my brain, that memory. I was 5. To be 5 and to be told something wrong with you and that you need to have hearing tests over and over again, whether you pass or fail or get it right, and I was not passing. I knew I wasn't passing. Even at 5, I could feel it. I could feel that dread. And to be told, there's something wrong with you. Instead of someone coming to me at 5 and saying, "There's nothing wrong with you, you're deaf." That would have been a deaf gain moment, as opposed to the hearing loss moment that I had then. And growing up, I was very angry because I thought my family, the audiologist, everyone is wrong about me. How they describe me is not who I am. As soon as I was able to have that language, and I had access to the language of sign language, I was able to fulfill who I am as a deaf person. And it didn't happen overnight. I had to keep looking for that deaf world and making those connections with the deaf world. And it didn't happen. And there were many nights when I didn't cry. I mean, I cried. And of course, there were many nights when I came home laughing. So good luck to you. Thank you. All right, do we need to stop now? Okay. Or did you have a question to ask me?
No, I'm just.
Tiffany has given me the look.
Yes, after years of doing ritual together, we know when we need to hook it up. I am just so very thankful that we could have Kirk with us here at Syracuse University. And I have to say, not many times can you say you are grateful for natural disasters. I am so thankful for Hurricane Sandy because it meant that Kirk got to visit our campus twice. And he was here in the fall, he preached at the Protestant Campus Ministry, and then he gets to be here today. He's going to actually be here today and tomorrow, and he's leaving on Friday. And so there is a lot of time for conversation. Tomorrow we'll be hosting a lunch here. Riddell, who has left, but you can get in touch with her, you can get in touch with me. There are still some spaces left at that lunch if you'd like to continue the conversation. We create temporary spaces all the time. And tonight was one of those temporary magical spaces. And so thank you, Kirk, for creating that and providing that for us. Can we offer Kirk our appreciation?
Thank you.